Okay, and thank you, Nick, for the compliment about the surname. My wife often tells me that's why she married me, so she's on the same page. Well, after Anne's inspiring discussion of holistic tourism, I feel like I'm now going to take you to the trivial, which is style significant? But I hope that by the end of the talk, she may agree with me that maybe style and well-being have some kind of connection. The question which I'm going to talk about today in some respects is quite simple. I want to look at a trend which I think has accelerated in the last 15 to 20 years in terms of redefining luxury from traditional notions of opulence towards sleekness. No? You might have to take me to... there we go. Traditional opulence was about things like chandeliers, gold taps, gold and encased furniture. It had traditional signifiers of wealth. We might associate it perhaps with aristocratic lifestyles. Today, we increasingly find that luxury is sleeker. It consists of modern, human-made or machine-made materials. In the place of gold or marble or polished wood, we find glass, polished concrete, things that are man-made and not necessarily also handmade. I think that's another interesting shift in the definition of luxury. It's not just the materials. I would argue that one of the interesting things about the redefinition of luxury is also that the rhetoric or the kinds of words that we use, not just to sell products, but in fact to make products sound sexy or interesting, has shifted. Once upon a time, people used to talk about grand hotels, great hotels. If you look at some of the books that come out, in a sense, to form tastes when it comes to luxury tourism, in the last 15 to 20 years, hip hotels, cool hotels, and of course the publication Wallpaper, which started in 1999, I would probably say is the starting point of this trend that I'm talking about. I should clarify by saying that I'm not suggesting that opulence or old style luxury is going to disappear overnight. I'm not talking about an absolute trend. I'm rather talking about what I think is a significant trend. This trend is also not just germane to luxury accommodation. We see it in many areas of life, but also in many luxury goods. This is what a 1950s Rolls-Royce used to look like. This is what a 2010 Rolls-Royce looks like. And I think that captures quite well the kind of cultural, psychological, emotional, and stylistic change that we're talking about in the move from opulence to sleekness. Okay, to bring this back to hotel accommodation and to share with you some of the research which, as Lindy indicated earlier, was commissioned. Well, old-style anthropologists, of course, would have spent a long time in the field. I had neither the time nor the resources to go out to the field, so I was able to use Luxperience and basically everyone who's exhibiting in 2014 as my sample. I encoded the data according to such stylistic categories as minimalist cool, eco-rustic, ethnic vernacular, classical elegant, heritage traditional, and grand opulent. I did start with more categories, but I found that some were completely insignificant. So for example, I couldn't find a boho luxury hotel amongst all the exhibitors. Now, if I'm wrong and you think that your hotel or resort is boho, please come forward and correct me. Now, I will clarify that when I came to coding minimalist and cool, I did include various kinds of sensibilities. I would say that probably my rule of thumb, again, was is it the kind of hotel or resort that would be featured in a wallpaper magazine or in one of the wallpaper guides? So in a sense, the South Ocean Lodge designed by Max Pritchard doesn't look like the design that we might find at the Faena Hotel in Puerto Madero in Buenos Aires, which is by Philip Stark. They definitely differ in terms of, one is, hyper minimalist, there's a lot of white. The other one is a kind of cross between Liberace and Andy Warhol. There's lots of colour, it's very playful. But I think both, and I should say that Stark, according to some commentators, is called a Baroque minimalist, that they both kind of evoke a kind of contemporary sensibility, and the design is a very important part of the experience. So my concept of minimalist cool was reasonably kind of broad. Okay, so what does the Luxperience exhibitors list look like once you've coded the data? Well, it proved my hypothesis, and it's always nice when graphs can prove your hypothesis. I found that at least 34% would readily fit into the definition of minimalist or cool, and in fact that the number of exhibitors kind of declines as you get closer to classical elegance, which I think is a very kind of interesting kind of pattern. Now I should say this is exteriors of buildings alone. I haven't yet crunched the data for interiors, but if you think about interiors in contemporary luxury accommodation, I would say that probably the interiors would be even much more skewed towards contemporary minimalist kind of sensibilities. In other words, even a heritage building today is likely to be gutted, and the interior of it is much likely to be a quite kind of contemporary kind of sensibility. Okay, well, that's the trend, but I want to leave you with a hypothesis which I can't really elaborate on here, which is, okay, minimalism's in, but what's likely to really capture imaginations in the near future or in the coming years? I'm really struck by the success of the Museum of Old and New Art in Tasmania. I don't know how many people have heard of it, but it's really the brainchild, or you might almost say the plaything, of a mathematical genius come gambler, cultural philanthropist called David Walsh, who himself is very much a part of the branding of this cultural institution. David Walsh appears quite regularly in the media, and people are as interested kind of in Walsh himself and his passion for contemporary art, his passion for Tasmania, and his passion for contemporary architecture. It's a multifaceted brand that includes art, interesting architecture designed by Nonda Katsalidis, a Melbourne architect, bespoke accommodation, scenery, gourmet food and wine, beer. There's also a microbrewery there that makes something called Moo Brew, which I encourage you to try, and festivals and performances. Now, why might this be interesting? Well, it's interesting to me because the architecture is fascinating, but what I think it also, in a sense, tells us about changing notions of luxury is that you have here not just accommodation, but really a very interesting diversification of the experience of something that is luxurious. In a way, David Walsh, and he's explicitly used this language before, is basically saying, come to my big living room and look at my paintings, which I think is very interesting. It means that some consumers will be paying $900 to $1,100 to stay in the architect designed chalets. If you're a Tasmanian, you get into the museum for free. And if you're not from Tasmania, you pay $20 to enter to see what is an excellent collection of contemporary art. They encourage you, of course, to experience the grounds, which is in a very scenic spot on the banks of the Derwent. And I think what this kind of trend in luxury kind of experiences is really saying is the experience is likely to be manifold, and what role the architecture plays here is absolutely dominant. This is architecture that says, come photograph me, talk about me. But if you can't afford $900 or $1,100 to stay here, at least come and experience me, which I find quite interesting. So whether or not this is the future, I think it's certainly a very interesting development. And within 10 months of it opening, it became the #1 tourist destination in Tasmania, which I think is also something that merits consideration. Okay, thank you.